This property is going back to the Blood family now. Pack your things and leave. My Uncle Raymond's voice echoed through the living room as I stood in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's black funeral suit. I watched in stunned silence as he instructed his children to carry away my grandfather's old armchair, the one my father loved to sit in and read the evening paper. "You have no right to be here," I said softly, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. Raymond turned to face me, his weathered face twisted into satisfaction. "No right? This is family property, boy. Always has been, always will be. Your father is gone now, and you're not real Coleman blood. It's that simple." My name is Jules Anderson, 37 years old, and until yesterday I thought I understood my place in this world. All my life, I was raised by Thomas Coleman, the man who chose to be my father when my biological mother died in childbirth and he, a recent widower, decided to adopt me at 3 months old. For 37 years, he was all I knew as family. We built what I believed to be a beautiful life together in this Victorian house in Richmond, Virginia, which his grandfather had left to him. But as I watched Raymond and his other sons, Gerald and Timothy, carrying my belongings toward the front door, I realized how naive I had been about his family's true feelings toward me. The morning after my father's funeral, I returned from my girlfriend's house to find the locks changed and the Coleman men treating my home as their personal storage facility. Raymond was at the center of it all, orchestrating the removal of my life as if I were nothing more than a temporary tenant whose lease had expired. "My father wouldn't want this," I whispered, my hands shaking as I watched them pile our family photos carelessly onto the porch. "Your father is dead," Raymond retorted. "And he was too nice when it came to you. We told him from the beginning that you were only after the family money, but he wouldn't listen. Well, that charade is over now." The words hit me like physical blows. 37 years of family dinners where I was tolerated but never truly welcome. 37 years of conversations that stopped when I entered the room. 37 years of being treated like a stranger at my own father's family gatherings. I had endured it all because my father asked me to, because he believed his family would eventually accept me. Gerald appeared beside his father, breathing heavily from moving furniture. "Most of his stuff is already outside, Dad. What about the kitchen utensils?" "Take what's valuable, leave the rest," Raymond replied without even looking at me. "He can have until sunset to collect any junk we don't want." As I stood there watching them dismantle my life, something cold settled in my chest. They completely underestimated me, just as they always had. But what they didn't know was that my father never underestimated them. My relationship with the Coleman family had been tense from the beginning. Even as a small child, I felt the unspoken tensions, the exchanged glances when my father called me his son. To Raymond and his wife Patricia, I was clearly a questionable choice. An adopted child who didn't carry the true Coleman blood, someone who had been brought into the family line out of pure emotion and sentimentality. "He's very different," Patricia had once said during a Christmas dinner when I was 8. I was helping clear the table while my father talked to Raymond about expanding the family business. "I suppose Thomas needs company after losing Linda." The subtle hints continued throughout my childhood and into adulthood. They never missed an opportunity to mention their friends' biological children, boys who had gone to private colleges and came from established families. When my father announced that he was updating his will when I turned 21, Raymond's first question was not about our future, but about asset protection. "You understand, Jules, that family property has been passed down through generations," he had said during what he called our discussion about estate planning. "The house, the land, the businesses. These things stay within the bloodline. Thomas is sentimental and idealistic, but business is business." My father had been uncomfortable during that conversation, shifting in his chair beside me. "Dad, we don't need to discuss this now." "Actually, we do," Raymond continued. "Jules seems like a sensible boy. I'm sure he understands the importance of preserving the family legacy." I had nodded politely, not wanting to cause trouble for my father, but inside I was boiling. The way Raymond talked about me, as if I were some opportunist planning to steal their precious legacy, turned my stomach. What they didn't realize was that I never wanted their money or their property. I loved my father because he chose me, because he gave me a home when I had nothing, because he proved that family is more than blood. But my father saw how his family treated me. He noticed how conversations became tense when I joined them, how invitations for holidays came with subtle suggestions that I might prefer to work that day. He watched your mother rearrange the seating at family dinners so that I always sat at the far end of the table. Most importantly, he heard the comments they made when they thought he wasn't listening. "Son, you could do so much better," Patricia had said one Sunday afternoon while I was in the kitchen. I heard every word through the thin walls. "That boy is nice enough, I suppose, but he's not our kind of person. He's not real Coleman blood." My father had defended me that day, his voice firm. "Mom, Jules is exactly my kind of person. He's thoughtful, hardworking, and he makes me happy. That should be enough." As I watched Raymond boss his children around like a foreman, I realized that this moment had been foreshadowed. My father knew. He always knew. And while they emptied my house with the arrogant confidence of those who believe they have the law on their side, I kept a secret that would completely destroy their certainty. If you're enjoying this story of justice and unexpected twists, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the moment when the truth finally comes out. Because what the Colemans didn't know was that my father had spent the last 5 years of his life building legal walls around us that they would never be able to tear down. My relationship with the Coleman family had always been marked by an invisible line that I could never cross. When Thomas adopted me at 3 months old, shortly after losing his wife Linda in a complicated pregnancy, Raymond made it clear that it was an emotional mistake that would cost the family dearly. I grew up hearing whispers at family gatherings. "He's not real blood," Patricia used to say to her friends during afternoon tea, not caring if I was in the next room. "Thomas is raising a stranger as if he were a legitimate Coleman. It's a disgrace to the family name." Raymond never hid his preference for his biological children. Gerald and Timothy received expensive gifts on their birthdays, while I got cards with $50 inside. They attended the private college that the family had been funding for generations, while my father had to fight to enroll me in a state university because investments in education should prioritize true Coleman blood, in my grandfather's exact words. The moment that defined my childhood happened when I was 12. It was great-grandfather Coleman's 80th birthday, a big celebration at the family estate in Henrico. All the Colemans were gathered for the official family photo, the one that would be framed and hung in the entrance hall of the main house. "Jules, could you please step out of the picture?" Raymond had said casually, as if asking someone to adjust a chair. "This is for official members of the Coleman family. You understand." I had frozen in place, feeling all heads turn to look at me. My father, who was standing next to me, flushed red with anger. "Dad, Jules is my son. He stays in the picture." "Thomas, don't be ridiculous," Patricia interjected. "This is a family lineage photo. The boy has no Coleman blood. He can take the next picture with us, the informal one." Humiliation burned on my face as I stepped out of the frame under the gaze of dozens of cousins, uncles, and distant relatives. None of them said a word in my defense. None of them questioned the decision. My father left the photo too. We spent the rest of the party sitting alone by the lake, him holding my hand silently while I tried not to cry. "Jules," he had said that day, his voice steady despite the sadness in his eyes. "Blood doesn't make family. Love does. And I chose you. Never doubt that." But things only got worse as I grew up. When I turned 18 and started working at the veterinary clinic my father ran, an extension of the family's agricultural products business, Raymond made a point of making it clear where I belonged. "The boy can work there as an employee," he said during a tense dinner. "But he doesn't get any shares or profit sharing. That's for blood family." Timothy, who was 23 at the time and had never worked a day in his life, received 15% of the company as a graduation gift. Gerald was given a director's position at 25, despite spending most of his time playing golf. I, who woke up at 5 in the morning to take care of the animals and worked 12 hours a day, received a fixed salary as a junior employee. "It's only temporary," my father assured me as we reviewed documents in his office. "When I take complete control of the business, you'll get your fair share. I promise." But Raymond kept tight control over the family finances, using money as a tool to manipulate his own son. The last straw came 3 years ago, when my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The news came like a bolt from the blue. Advanced stages, minimal chances of recovery. 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. I was in the office with him when Dr. Williams delivered the diagnosis. I watched my father, that strong man who had raised me alone, taught me everything about responsibility and unconditional love, absorb the information with surprising calm. How much time do I have to put my affairs in order? He had asked. I suggest you start immediately, the doctor replied gently. With cases like this, we never know how much time we really have. That night, my father took me to dinner at an Italian restaurant we had frequented since my childhood. He ordered expensive wine, something he rarely did, and held my hand across the table. Jules, I need to tell you something important, he began, and there was a determination in his eyes that I had never seen before. My family is going to try to take everything from you when I'm gone. You know that, don't you? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Tears were already beginning to blur my vision. They've always seen me as weak for choosing you, he continued. They always thought you were temporary, that when I died everything would go back to the blood Colemans, as if family property were some kind of divine right. He paused, taking a sip of wine. But they're wrong about something fundamental. About what? I managed to ask. About me being weak, he said, his eyes shining with fierce intensity. I've spent the last 20 years building legal walls around us that they don't even know exist. And in the coming months, I'm going to make sure those walls are impenetrable. In the months that followed, as cancer ravaged his body, my father worked with obsessive determination. He hired Charles Peton, Richmond's most respected real estate lawyer, and spent countless hours in his office reviewing documents, updating wills, registering deeds. What are you doing? I asked one evening, finding him surrounded by papers even as chemotherapy left him exhausted. Protecting you, he replied simply. Protecting everything we've built together. But the Coleman family showed no concern for legal issues. They were already certain that everything would be theirs. I will never forget the conversation I overheard 3 weeks before my father died. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the Colemans had come to visit my father, although they spent more time taking inventory of the house than actually talking to him. I was upstairs helping my father bathe when I heard loud voices coming from the living room. How long did the doctor say he has? It was Gerald's voice. Maybe a month, Raymond replied. We need to start preparing for the transition of ownership. The house needs to be emptied, the clinic needs new managers. What about the boy? Timothy asked. What do we do with Jules? Jules is not our problem, Patricia interjected, her voice cold as ice. He'll have to find his own way. This house has belonged to the Coleman family for 4 generations. It's not going to be some adopted orphan who's going to change that. But what if he causes legal problems? Gerald pressed. What if he tries to claim something? Raymond laughed, a cruel, confident sound. On what basis? He doesn't have Coleman blood. Thomas may have been sentimental, but the law is clear on family property. I've already consulted our lawyer. Jules has no claim. He can keep Thomas's clothes and maybe a few personal items, but the house, the clinic, the land, everything goes back to the blood family. Perfect, Timothy said with satisfaction. So as soon as the funeral is over, we start the removal? Let's give him a few days out of decency, Raymond replied. But yes, the sooner we get him out of here, the better. I don't want any dramatic scenes or emotional complications. I held my father tightly as we descended the stairs, my heart pounding with anger and fear. But when I looked at his face, I saw no despair. I saw something that looked strangely close to satisfaction. Did you hear that? I whispered. Every word, he replied softly, a small smile touching his lips despite the obvious pain. Perfect. That makes everything easier. Easier? Dad, they're planning to kick me out of our house. Jules, he put his hand on my shoulder, his eyes meeting mine intensely. Trust me. Just a few more weeks. And then you'll see how much they've underestimated both you and me. He didn't explain anything else that day. And I didn't press him, respecting that he had his reasons. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October, the golden autumn light filtering through the windows of the room where we spent his last days. I held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering how much I loved him and how grateful I was that he had chosen me, that he had given me a family when I had nothing. The funeral was 2 days later at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, the same place where he had married Linda 38 years earlier. The Coleman family took over all the arrangements, pushing me aside as they planned what they considered appropriate for their son. I let them control the details, knowing that their assumptions would soon catch up with them. Jules, dear, "You'll be sitting in the second row," Patricia informed me on the morning of the service. "The family sits in the first row." I nodded silently, choosing not to point out that I was his son and therefore his closest family. Their behavior was providing me with yet more evidence of their complete disregard for my place in my father's life. After the service, Raymond pulled me aside in the cemetery. "We'll give you a few days to mourn, Jules, but then we need to discuss practical matters. The house will need to be emptied, and we'll need time to prepare it for Gerald's family." I stared at him, unable to believe his audacity. And it was at that very moment, as he talked about removing my life from that house as if I were a piece of old furniture, that I realized something crucial. They had no idea what was coming. No idea what my father had built over the past 3 years. And as Raymond continued to talk about family property and bloodline, I kept my expression neutral, knowing that the storm that was about to hit them would be devastating. I spent that first night at my girlfriend Emma's house, unable to fully process what had happened. She held my hand as I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how my own family could be so cruel less than 48 hours after we buried my father. "Do they really think they can just kick you out?" Emma asked, her voice laden with indignation. "Jules, you need a lawyer. Now." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. My father had told me to trust him. He had talked about legal walls, about protection. But as Raymond and his sons ransacked my house, I wondered if I had underestimated their cruelty. The next morning, I returned to Richmond determined to confront them, but I found the scene I described at the beginning of this story. They were already inside, changing locks, removing furniture, treating decades of my life like trash to be thrown away. "You're late," Gerald said when he saw me standing on the porch, watching them carry away the dining table where we celebrated every birthday, every achievement. "We've already separated your clothes and some personal items. They're in those boxes over there." He pointed to 3 cardboard boxes stacked carelessly near the garage. 37 years of life reduced to 3 boxes. "The veterinary clinic," I managed to say, my voice coming out weaker than I intended. "My father and I built that business together. I've worked there for 15 years. Raymond came out of the house at that moment, holding my father's collection of antique watches, pieces he had collected over decades. "The clinic is Coleman property," he said simply. "It always has been. Your father just managed it for the family. Now Gerald will take over the management." "I managed it?" I repeated, feeling anger begin to replace the shock. "I was the head veterinarian. 90% of the clients know me personally." "They knew you as an employee," Patricia appeared behind her husband. "It's different from being the owner. Jules, dear, you need to understand your position. Thomas was generous in raising you, in giving you opportunities. But that doesn't change the biological facts. You're not Coleman blood." The way she said blood made my stomach churn. As if decades of love, of hard work, of building a life together meant absolutely nothing. "My father loved me," I said, and my voice finally found strength. "He chose me. That counts for something." "Love doesn't change legal inheritance," Raymond replied, walking back into the house. "And inheritance is about blood, not feelings. You have until nightfall to collect your boxes. After that, we will consider any presence of yours here as trespassing." I stood there for another 10 minutes, watching them systematically dismantle every piece of the life I had built with my father. I saw Timothy carry away the bookcase of medical books, Gerald remove the pictures from the walls, Patricia label valuable objects with those little yellow inventory tags. It was Emma who finally called me, pulling me back to reality. "Jules, you can't just stand there and watch. Call a lawyer. Call the police. Do something." But before I could respond, I remembered my father's words. Charles Peton. He has instructions. I hung up on Emma and dialed the number my father had given me months ago, the one he told me to use when the time came. The phone rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. Charles Peton's office, real estate and estate planning. "My name is Jules Anderson," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "My father, Thomas Coleman, was a client of Mr. Peton's. He said I should call if—" "Mr. Anderson," the receptionist interrupted me gently. "Mr. Peton was expecting your call. He left specific instructions." "Can you tell me where you are right now?" "I'm outside my house," I replied. "But my father's family is inside, removing everything. They changed the locks. There was a brief pause, followed by rapid typing. Mr. Peton can be there in 20 minutes. Please do not enter the property and do not confront anyone. Just wait. The call ended, leaving me with more questions than answers. But for the first time since the funeral, I felt a spark of hope. My father had planned for this. He knew exactly what his family would do. I sat in the car, watching the commotion continue. Gerald came out carrying my guitar, the one my father gave me when I turned 16. Timothy followed with boxes of photographs, including entire albums from my childhood. Each item removed was another stab, another layer of humiliation. But I waited. Because something told me the storm was just beginning. 19 minutes later, a silver BMW pulled up behind my car. A man in his 60s got out, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it weighed a ton. "Mr. Anderson?" he asked, extending his hand. "Charles Peton. Your father was a great friend of mine, as well as a client." I shook his hand, feeling the firmness of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "They're taking everything." "I see that," Charles replied calmly, his eyes assessing the situation with the precision of a surgeon. "And I assume they didn't ask for your permission?" "Permission?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. "They changed the locks and told me I have until nightfall to leave." Charles nodded, as if this information only confirmed something he already expected. "Perfect. That makes everything much simpler." He opened the briefcase and began removing documents. "Mr. Anderson, your father spent the last 3 years of his life preparing for this very moment. What you are about to witness is the result of meticulous planning and a paternal love that transcends even death." He began walking toward the house, and I followed him, my heart racing. "Get ready," Charles said over his shoulder. "Because the next few minutes are going to change everything." Raymond was the first to see us coming. His face, previously confident and satisfied, paled visibly when he recognized the lawyer. "Charles? What are you doing here?" "Representing my client, Mr. Coleman," Charles replied formally. "And correcting some very serious misconceptions that you and your family seem to have about property and inheritance." He climbed the porch steps with authority, and I followed him, feeling for the first time in days that maybe, just maybe, justice still existed in this world. But what I didn't know was that the next few minutes would not only change everything. They would completely destroy the Coleman family's arrogant certainties and reveal how much my father had loved, protected, and above all, believed in me until his last breath. Charles opened his briefcase on my dining room table while Raymond, Patricia, Gerald, and Timothy gathered around like cornered animals. For the first time since I had known them, I saw uncertainty on their faces. "Let's start with the will," Charles said calmly, pulling out a thick document with the official seal of the notary. Thomas Coleman, in full possession of his mental faculties, prepared this document 3 years before his death. It was last updated 6 months ago. 3 years. Raymond repeated, his voice faltering. "But he never mentioned." "Because he knew exactly what you would do," Charles interrupted. "And he chose to protect his son in silence, as he always did." He began to read aloud, and each word was like a bomb exploding in the room. "I leave the entirety of my assets, property, investments, and businesses to my son Jules Anderson, whom I chose to love from the day I first held him in my arms. He is my true family, my real legacy, and the only heir I wish to recognize." Patricia gasped. "That can't be legal. Family property has traditions, expectations." "Expectations have no legal value, Mrs. Coleman," Charles replied coldly. "Your husband was an only child. This property belonged exclusively to Thomas. He could leave it to whomever he wanted. And he chose Jules. But the veterinary clinic," Gerald protested. "My grandfather started that business. It's Coleman property." "Thomas bought Raymond's share 5 years ago," Charles said, pulling out another document. "He paid $250,000 out of his own pocket. It's all on record. The clinic was 100% his, and now it's 100% Jules's." The silence that followed was absolute. I saw Raymond sink into a chair, his face draining of color. "There's more," Charles continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Thomas also left a letter explaining his decisions. A very detailed letter." He began to read, and I felt tears burning my eyes as I heard my father's words spoken aloud. To my blood family, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and Jules is facing exactly what I predicted you would do. For 37 years, I watched you treat my son like an intruder, like someone unworthy of the Coleman name. I documented every cruel comment, every deliberate exclusion, every time you made him feel less than human. Charles paused, looking at each member of the Coleman family. I remember the family photo when Jules was 12, when you pushed him out of the frame because he wasn't true blood. I remember every Christmas where his gifts were clearly inferior. I remember every dinner where you seated him at the end of the table, as if his presence was an inconvenience. Thomas was being dramatic, Raymond tried to argue, but his voice came out weak. Dramatic? Charles asked. He attached photographs, witnesses, specific dates. That's not drama, Mr. Coleman. It's meticulous documentation of decades of family cruelty. He turned another page. Jules never asked for anything but to be accepted. He worked twice as hard as anyone to prove his worth, never understanding that he didn't have to prove anything. You judged him for not having Coleman blood, but it was that absence that made him better than any of you. He learned empathy, humility, and hard work because he didn't have the privilege of leaning on a surname. I saw Patricia wipe tears from her face, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not after all this. For these reasons, Charles concluded reading, Thomas included a non-contest clause. Any attempt to challenge this will result in the immediate loss of any minor legacy they may have. He left $1,000 to each of you. Challenge the will, and you lose even that. $1,000? Timothy repeated, incredulous. After everything we did for the family? After everything you did to him, you mean, I corrected, my voice coming out stronger than I intended. You spent my entire life reminding me that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't true blood. But my father loved me anyway. And now you will live with the consequences of your choices. Raymond stood up, his hands shaking. Jules, please. We are family. We can work this out civilly. Family. I repeated, feeling all the anger and pain of 37 years rising up. Where was this family when you excluded me? Where was it when you planned my removal before my father's body was even cold? Charles calmly put the documents away. You have until noon tomorrow to return every item you removed from this property. Every piece of furniture, every object, every photograph. If anything is missing or damaged, I will take immediate legal action. And if we don't return it? Gerald challenged, a last spark of arrogance in his voice. Then I'll add trespassing, theft, and destruction of property to the civil suit, Charles replied without hesitation. Your father has already given me permission to use any legal means necessary to protect Jules. And I intend to honor that request. They left in silence, carrying the weight of their shattered assumptions. If you believe that true justice comes from love and not blood ties, stay with us to see how this story ends in a way no one would ever expect. I was left alone with Charles in the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their invasion. Your father planned all this? I asked, still processing. Charles smiled slightly. Every word, every document, every legal protection. He spent the last 3 years of his life building walls that no one could tear down. Because he loved you more than they could ever understand. But what none of us knew at that moment was that the true fall of the Colemans was just beginning. Charles spread more documents across the table as the Coleman family watched in stunned silence. But there's something none of you considered, he said, pulling a red folder from his briefcase. Thomas didn't just protect Jules legally. He documented everything. Documented. Patricia repeated, her voice coming out as a whisper. What exactly? 37 years of family exclusion, Charles replied. Starting with the family photo when Jules was 12, when Raymond removed him from the frame because he wasn't true blood. He slid an old photograph across the table. In it, I was clearly visible on the sidelines, outside the family group. Raymond paled. That was decades ago. It doesn't mean. It means Thomas was paying attention, Charles interrupted. He attached witness statements, records of discriminatory birthday gifts, emails where you discussed excluding Jules from family decisions. Gerald stood up abruptly. That's invasion of privacy. It's documentation of a pattern of emotional abuse, Charles corrected. and it will be presented in court if you try to contest the will. Timothy looked at his father, panic evident. Dad, you said we had legal rights. That family property always goes back to the bloodline. I was wrong, Raymond admitted, his voice breaking for the first time. Completely wrong. Thomas also wrote individual letters to each of you, Charles continued, handing out sealed envelopes. He wanted you to know exactly why he made this choice. I watched as they opened the envelopes with trembling hands. Patricia was the first to read hers, and tears began to stream down her impassive face. He remembered everything, she whispered. Every cruel comment, every exclusion. Raymond read silently, his face losing more color with each line. He called me a moral failure as a father, he finally said, looking at me. He said I raised children who value money above humanity. And he was right, I replied, meeting his eyes for the first time with complete confidence. You judged me my whole life for something I never asked for. For not carrying Coleman blood. As if genetics determined value. Jules, Raymond began, but Charles interrupted him. We're not done yet. Thomas left specific instructions about the veterinary clinic. Jules takes over as sole owner immediately. All client records, equipment, and contracts are in his name. But I already promised management to Gerald, Raymond protested. A promise you had no authority to make, Charles replied coldly. The clinic was Thomas's. Now it's Jules's. Gerald slumped in his chair. My family was counting on that income. Maybe you should have considered that before planning to rob Jules's house, I said, feeling years of anger finally finding a voice. I heard you that afternoon. Planning to kick me out while my father was dying upstairs. Patricia gasped. You heard. Every word. About changing locks. About dividing his belongings. About how I wasn't your problem. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas asked me to make sure you understood something, Charles said, putting the documents away. Jules isn't the orphan you always made him feel like. He's the beloved son of a man who chose love over tradition. And now he has everything Thomas built because he earned it through decades of devotion. Raymond looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than arrogance. We completely underestimated you. No, I corrected. You underestimated my father. He saw your cruelty more clearly than I did. And he spent years silently protecting me. Charles closed his briefcase. You have until tomorrow to return everything. Every item. The next morning, Raymond showed up with a rental truck. Alone. Gerald and Timothy refused to come, sending messages saying they needed to protect their own families from the legal repercussions. The close-knit family they had boasted about had disintegrated in less than 24 hours. I watched from the porch as he unloaded every item they had stolen. The dining table. The photographs. The guitar. Even my grandmother's rocking chair, which wasn't even Coleman's property. Jules, he said when he was done, his voice carrying a defeat I never thought I'd witness. I need to apologize. Apologize. I repeated, crossing my arms. For 3 decades of humiliation? For making me feel unworthy of my own father's love? For planning to disown me while he was dying? Raymond lowered his eyes. I was wrong. About everything. Thomas tried to tell me years ago, but I wouldn't listen. What did he say? I asked, curious despite my anger. That family isn't determined by genetics, but by choice. That you were more Coleman at heart than any of us ever would be. He paused, wiping his eyes. And that when he died, I would discover exactly how much I had wasted by rejecting you. I kept my face neutral. He was right. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded like falling dominoes. Patricia faced social ostracism when the story leaked through Richmond's high society circles. The woman who had spent decades building a reputation through exclusivity discovered that cruelty to orphans was not exactly an admirable calling card. Gerald lost his promised job when his future employers found out about the attempted theft. No one wants to hire someone whose first reaction to a family death is to break into properties. Timothy faced prosecution for some valuable items that disappeared during the break-in and were never returned. As for the veterinary clinic, I officially took over as sole owner. The clients, who had known me for 15 years, welcomed me with relief. We always knew you were the real heart of this place, Mrs. Henderson said as she brought her poodle in for a checkup. Your father would be proud. Emma helped me reorganize the house, removing the last traces of the Coleman break-in. How are you feeling? She asked one evening as we ate dinner in the newly restored living room. Honestly? Relieved, I admitted. My father spent the last 3 years protecting me, proving that I was worth everything he had built. He saw my value when I myself doubted it. Charles Petton showed up a month later with a final envelope. Your father asked me to deliver this after everything was settled, he explained. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated 2 weeks before my father's death. Jules, my beloved son, it began. If you're reading this, it means my family did exactly what I predicted. And you discovered that I never doubted you for a second. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I spent 37 years watching my blood family reject you. Every exclusion, every cruel comment, every reminder that you weren't really a Coleman. And every time, I chose you again. Because true family isn't about DNA. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves unconditionally. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing specific memories. My high school graduation where only he attended. The nights studying together for my veterinary exams. The quiet Sundays fixing fences and caring for animals. These are my true riches, he wrote. Not the house or the clinic, but the moments we built together. He concluded with words I will carry with me forever. You didn't inherit my blood, Jules. You inherited something much more valuable, my heart, my values, my understanding that family is built through daily choices. And you have always been my best choice. I folded the letter carefully, realizing that my father had given me more than legal protection. He had given me validation. Undeniable proof that I deserved every bit of his legacy. 3 months later, Raymond asked to talk. We met at a neutral cafe in downtown Richmond. He looked like he had aged a decade. Gerald lost the house, he said without preamble. Patricia and I are getting divorced. Timothy is in treatment for addiction. I nodded, feeling no satisfaction at their misfortune. You came here to tell me that? I came to say that Thomas was right, he replied, his voice breaking. I spent my whole life obsessed with blood and lineage. I lost my son because of it. And now I've lost everything else too. Raymond, I didn't do this to you, I said firmly. You did this to yourselves. My father just made sure I wouldn't be a victim of your choices. He nodded in agreement. I know. And that's the hardest part to accept. We finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence. As we got up to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, Jules, you're a better man than I ever was. Thomas chose well. Those were the first genuinely kind words he had said to me in 37 years. Today, 2 years after my father's death, I run the most successful veterinary clinic in Richmond. I've expanded to a second location in Henrico. Emma and I were married in the garden of the Victorian house, surrounded by true friends who knew me for my character, not my last name. I kept the Coleman name. Not because it was blood, but because it was given to me through love. And every day, when I sign documents or see clients, I remember that family isn't about genetics. It's about who chooses you, who believes in you, who builds walls of protection around you even when they're no longer here to defend you in person. Raymond occasionally appears from afar, watching the clinic thrive. We never get in touch, but sometimes I wave. Not out of complete forgiveness, but out of understanding. He lost everything by chasing the illusion of blood purity. I gained everything by embracing the reality of chosen love. If you have also faced family rejection or questioned your own worth, subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that true family is built through daily choices, not biological accidents. The last time I visited my father's grave, I left a copy of the clinic's expansion document. Thank you for choosing me, I whispered. Thank you for proving I was worth it. And thank you for teaching me that the strongest blood doesn't run through your veins, but through your heart. And as I walked away from that cemetery toward the life we built together, I realized the ultimate truth. Raymond was right about one thing. I wasn't really a Coleman by blood. I was something much better. I was a Coleman by choice. And that, in the end, made all the difference.